Hi, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. Appreciate you checking in tonight. If you're watching on Tuesday at 6 p.m., you're watching live. The call-in number is 640-3091. And after quite the hiatus for the summer, with very few public meetings going on in Manchester over the last 5 or 6 weeks, we did have a school board meeting tonight. Last night. I'm sorry, and there's a Monday night, and there's an automatic meeting on tonight. So if you're watching live, the automatic meeting will be on right after this on the next channel over, channel 22. So that's exciting because there's lots of things going on as ever. I hope everybody's having a great summer. The whole reading thing for the schools, there's a little people rebel against a little piece, and why are my kids being required to read? Not to poo-poo all that, but I generally say to parents, kind of get over it. It's a good thing if little Mary or little Johnny really doesn't want to read and can't read and won't read. I don't know if I'd open up World War III over it, but to pretend that it isn't a good thing for kids to do some reading in the summertime would be wrong. So I suggest that the people who find it to be a problem, I would do some self-examination and say, what can I do to encourage my kids to read? The wonderful thing about reading today is that there are lots of wonderful choices, and now we have the Bookery here in Manchester, which is a wonderful bookstore, and you can go in there. It's a curated bookstore, so therefore, meaning a fancy word for you can ask the people behind the counter, would they suggest something for kids of various ages and various interests? And of course, there's always Barnes and Noble, and if that's not big enough, there's the worldwide rep. But there are a lot of choices for people to read, and I'm a big advocate of that. So the good news, as I said, is we did have a meeting of the school board last night, which means things are moving, hopefully, and stuff have happened, and we can talk about it. The bad news is I didn't make it to the meeting, and the meeting wasn't televised, although it was taped, if that's the right word for digital recording nowadays, and it will be played later on. But the good news is I have two wonderful ladies with me here tonight who did attend the meeting and who are two of the perhaps great experts on the public school system here in Manchester, and that is Sue and Maxine from the Manchester Education Association, representing the teachers of Manchester schools. Welcome, ladies, once again.
Thank you, Jim. Great to be here.
Hi, Jim. We're happy to be back.
Lovely to have you. Because since I wasn't at the meeting, and I've heard some stuff secondhand, whatever else, and as I told the ladies offline, I didn't pre-prepare a set. I oftentimes have a list of subjects or questions that I want to go down through, but tonight we'll go a little free-flowing, I think, because I didn't attend the meeting, and therefore I'd like to talk about some of the more important things that might have happened there. But let me start with probably the thing that I care about the most. That's the right word. The thing that I want to hear first about, at least, is about the teacher's contract. Mm-hmm. So I'm aware of the fact that that's all something still in negotiation, but would you like to tell us where we are with that and et cetera?
We'd be happy to.
Okay.
Currently, the contract is still in negotiations. Negotiation meetings have started up again during the summer. So we started the summer at impasse. And at this point, we are not at impasse anymore. We have both sides came together to talk about what do we want to do and how can we accomplish that. So we have met a couple of times now.
Right.
We have some proposals on the table on both sides. For each other to really take a look at. And I think, especially right now, one on insurance that both sides are looking at in depth to see if this is something that's really going to work well for the district and for the people who work in the district.
Right.
There's not a lot I can say because it's an ongoing negotiation, but at the same time, we are back, and we certainly are talking, and I think one of the great results of this that I'm sure Maxine can expound on some more is the fact that we're taking these efforts in good faith.
Okay.
And so because of the good faith, we're making sure that teachers especially are getting back to school in a timely manner and being able to go in and set up classrooms.
Okay. So let me ask, whichever, maybe Maxine, one of my thoughts is, since the budget was passed and there's zero money allowed in the budget for teachers, And of course, I know also the contract is more than just about money, but since there's I was reminded of it when you mentioned, Sue, about negotiating in good faith. I'm not accusing the board of not negotiating in good faith, but at least there's a question mark over it when you're negotiating. If I want someone to come and fix my car, and I actually don't have the money to pay for it, I don't know how much negotiating I'm doing with the mechanic. Maybe I'm a little colored in my thinking, but how would you address that? I mean, the fact is that as the budget stands today, there's no additional money there, and teachers haven't had an award. So how is that going to be solved?
I think there's a couple of concerns, Jim. I think one of them is seeing what the Board of Aldermen did last month, where they authorized putting money aside to make sure that the city employees who are in the units that are negotiating their contract are going to get their steps. If they're off step, they're going to get their longevity or their COLAs. So they, even without contract resolution, have assured those folks that they will be getting their steps or their opportunities to make more money next year. While we are a school district and not a school department, we're still employees within the city of Manchester. So I think there's a double standard going on. We as the MEA cannot go in front of that board and ask them to do the same thing. That has to come from the Board of School Committee.
Right.
To date, that has not been done. Last night, the Board of School Committee, one of the things they did, which I think was a bold and strong step about fairness and equity, is that we do have some persons in our district, specifically our workers for food and nutrition and our 21st century staff, that there was an error found in the way that they had been paying their insurance. They were overpaying for 5 years.
Okay.
The board voted last night to make that right. They are going to take care of those people. They're going to provide some equity for them and some fairness. We are extremely happy about that. And now our sense is, okay, so now it's time for fairness and equity for the rest of the units. You're right, though. It's very difficult because the budget that goes forward, they cannot project any raises.
Right.
They cannot project any benefit. So we're really behind the 8 ball every time that we negotiate a
Right.
contract. And I think, Sue is right. We're back at the table. Both sides are saying that they're there in good faith. And I hope that holds true because we have about 1,200 teachers right now going back to school with the kids on September 5th, and I want to assure the public that our staff will be there every day from bell to bell to work with their kids. But we won't be doing extras. But we have authorized as a union today for our folks to be able to go in starting tomorrow to set up their classrooms. They will not be using their personal property. They will be using the materials that the school district has provided for them. We think that's very fair and very equitable. The other piece of this problem is I think the community needs to really pay attention to how many people are leaving the Manchester School District as far as staff. We had about 40 retirements. That's pretty normal. But we're having people resigning the district, especially some of our younger teachers that have gotten a lot of training here in Manchester.
Right.
The district has paid a lot for their educational training as far as professional development. And what's happening is they're moving on to other school districts and walking in the door making $10,000 to $15,000 more because we're 3 steps behind. Our steps were frozen for 3 years. So here's the inequity. Let's just say that I'm on step 6, and I've been on step 6. I was frozen for 3 years. So right now I should be on a step 9. Somebody else who's hired today that comes in with the same experience that I do, though not in Manchester, it's going to be paid in a step 9. I'm still going to be on a step 6. So I think that the members of the school board negotiation team has seen that, and they have understood that. I think they were pretty shocked by how people are really losing money over the lifetime of their career. And we're hoping that we find a way to really support our educators. They have families to support also.
Right.
Teachers are always portrayed as greedy. We're not.
Right.
We're putting our people back in their schools. We're asking them to set up their classrooms. We're asking them to do their job from bell to bell. That's what our parents expect. That's what we expect of ourselves.
Right. Right. Can I ask you who's on the who actually is on the negotiating committee for the school board? Who are the
The
members?
school board, the special committee on negotiations is chaired by Rich Gerard.
Okay.
Also on the committee is Sarah Ambrosi, Katie DeRozier, Ross Terrio, and Jimmy LaHoo.
Okay. All right, and so you meet when you meet. Is there a schedule of meetings? Is there a meeting every week, or is it people go away from the table to discuss what has been discussed and then come back at a sometime later? Or is there like a weekly meeting or something, or how does that?
There's an almost weekly meeting.
Okay.
This summer, especially right around now, was a little difficult with some people on vacation.
Right, right.
But for the most part, we try to do a weekly meeting, or at least every week and a half or so, because sometimes it's dependent on information we need to go seek and prepare
Right.
for the other side to look at, and for them as well. And of course, with the meeting last night, the reports that had to be done, with all the people moving about this district and leaving the district and having to hire so many people and so on, it's been very difficult for some of the people who are working in the district offices to be able to provide information to the board so
Right.
that they can bring forward the proposals they want to bring forward.
I'm going to just jump into the middle of something here because it's something I should have done at the outset of this program that I intended to do. I mentioned it last week, but and that was the untimely passing of Diane Antosia from Central High School, and she there was a service for her in. On last Thursday morning, I think it was, and there was some. Jane Clayton spoke from Central High School, and some others. Corey Doherty spoke, and some people. But anyway, it was a wonderful. It was, but she was a very special person, and had brought a lot of. Did a lot of work as an SEP. Professional in the public schools, was working with kids often who are most vulnerable and at the most vulnerable times in their lives. So, but why I thought about it first of all, my commiserations again to her and her family, and she is a loss to Central and a loss to the school district.
Absolutely.
But when you mentioned about people moving around in the district, I'm thinking how as a district, where do you find the replacement for Diane Antosia in the
Right.
middle of August?
Yeah.
2 weeks before, and that not as something as tragic as that, but people leaving all the time and moving. There's a lot of pieces have to be put in place during the 2 months of the summer.
Absolutely.
The Human Resources Department of the school district is extraordinarily understaffed. It's a very small department for the largest public school district in the state. We have talked to the superintendent and school board members about our concern about such a small department being able to adequately stay on top of what they need to stay on top of. I mean, Diane's death is tragic. Whoever is going to come in and do that job will have a different style and a different flair and forge their own way. But Jim, to be honest with you, we have multiple staff across the district that are out on significantly medical situations. We are always at a loss of how to help kids through somebody they love and care about not being there.
Right.
But I think that the district needs to really take a hard look at how they're going to really move through not just tragedies like this, but how do you encourage people to come work for the school district when our pay scale is far below people around us, when our people are leaving because they can make so much more money somewhere else. Dr. Vargas is absolutely correct. This is a gem of a school district. This has an extraordinarily dedicated staff, extraordinary services to children, but we're understaffed.
Right, right.
And we're going to open the school year. I'm fearful of how many positions are not going to be filled, including administrators.
Right.
They're really struggling to get positions filled, and administration across the district is working extraordinarily hard to try to do this.
I want to go back to the compensation levels for teachers and teachers leaving, but a couple of things. We had Dr. Vargas talked on the administrator side. He talked about the fact that a candidate they had chosen for Park Southside, I think it was, who. No, it wasn't. It was Hallsville, I believe, who chose to take a job elsewhere because there was more than $10,000 difference,
Yeah.
and he would have had to take a $10,000 pay cut
Right.
to come and accept a job in Manchester. What sort of fries me a little bit about this is, you can listen to this channel sometimes, and there are people on programs on Channel 23 in Manchester who are not the best friends of public education always, who continue certain tropes, and that's a fancy word for lies, actually. And I don't want to be argumentative with people, but it needs to be called out as it is. And you know, I've spoken to Alderman Joe Kelly Levasseur, for instance, in the past, and I've said to him, because and I don't want to single him out as like the bad guy, but he is a person who goes on and constantly talks about if there was really a problem with teacher compensation in Manchester, they wouldn't be lining up here in droves to come here. That's one of his points. And another one of his points is, and some are leaving, and nobody ever leaves this district. They come and they stay. And I've said to him on a couple of occasions now, you're factually incorrect. So just because you like to hear the sound of those words coming out of your mouth, and because you've kept saying them for so many years, it doesn't make them any more true. Teachers are leaving Manchester School District. Other than people who are retiring, there are people choosing to leave and go elsewhere. Because of issues like the compensation level. But does the MEA have numbers around that? Is there something like solid that we could say, you know, we used to lose 1% per year, we're now losing 4%? Or, I mean, how do we get that story out? How do the public get to understand that? I just want to say this, and I'll let you back in, but I constantly have my couple of things that I say about, which because they're facts and people don't like to hear them because it makes everybody upset. Democrats and Republicans and non-party affiliates sitting on boards squirming their little bottoms a bit because they don't want to hear that they've got the cheapest school district in the state, that they spend less than every other school district in the state per capita. They don't want to talk about that. And they also don't want to talk about the fact that we've got the least number of teachers per student of any city in the state. Not that we want to keep on saying it. I'm going to keep on saying it all the time because I feel like I'm the canary in the coal mine. But now we added to, we have a point about the fact that our compensation package is falling behind comparable towns.
Well, I'll give you a couple of components of that. One, let's look at our building level administrators. Overworked, for sure.
Right.
But the district, in its wisdom a couple of years ago, decided to help classroom teachers and specialists, educators, to get their certification for administration, hoping to groom from within. So we had cadres, Sue was one of them, people who went through training, intensified training, got certified as administrators. They're leaving the district because they're going to make extraordinary amount of money more leaving the district. So the question is, you know, for somebody to say, well, people don't leave the district. This year we're seeing an exodus.
Really?
It's big.
We're a large amount of people. The school district does exit interviews, but we're doing an exit survey of everybody in our unit that has resigned the district. And we are getting that data back. We'll be talking about that in the public session at the next board meeting and sharing that, not people's names, but there are people saying they would not recommend this district for their friends and family to come work with. Other people saying that they would. We're trying to tease out what does that really mean.
Right.
I think it's a very complex situation. I'm starting my 39th year here.
Wow.
I know.
Good for you.
I know.
Ta-da. There should be any music.
I know. She's
That's right.
I wish I had one of those DJ boards.
Well, you
you know?
can gong me.
Yeah.
I don't know which one else.
But the guys on the radio have like boards where they
Yep.
they hit a key and it goes dun 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 or something. You know.
That's right.
I'm gonna put in a request
But I
for one of
don't
those.
think, Jim, that I'm extraordinary. We have a lot of people that have been here a long time.
Right.
But those of us who stay are dedicated to inner city kids. We're dedicated to kids that have what's called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, a lot of trauma.
Right.
So we know that if we weren't here, those kids might not get what they need. But I'm fearful that the new generations of educators coming up are not going to stay.
Right.
Because if you're not treated with respect, and you're
Yep.
not treated with dignity, and you're not paid a fair living wage at the education level that you're at, and that you have other units, you know, fire and police, you know, we're so supportive of fire and police, but they can retire at 20 years.
Right.
They have longevity steps, they have COLAs,
Overtime.
and they have overtime.
Right.
And that goes all into their retirement system. So we're a different animal, and we recognize that. But there's an inequity about the respect for public education and public educators.
And this is being repeated across the country, right? This is
Yes.
not. I mean, you know, we have this problem where in some states, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arizona, some states where it's become particularly egregious. But you know, teachers are working 2 and 3 jobs just to. I mean, What is the starting salary for somebody, a freshly minted education graduate coming in, with starting teaching in a school in Manchester? What's the base package?
In
The
Manchester,
base pay?
the base salary is $37,250.
Right. So after having spent 4 years in school, I don't want to talk about but like in colleges, I know that for instance, 4 years ago, Syracuse University was $64,000 a year.
Right.
This year it's $72,000 a year. Now, not everybody, they're not all as much as Syracuse or whatever else, but UNH is $33,000 or $34,000 a year. So that's 100, and if you get all the help in the world, and you're as poor can be. We just had the Perkins loans eliminated by Congress, so the loans that were for the poorest students in the United States, and out of bloody mindedness led by the wonderful Lamar Alexander, and I'm being facetious, his rationale for voting down the Perkins loans to eliminate grants was that there was already too many different programs, which is just patently false. That there were too many different programs and it was too complicated, so they wouldn't renew the program. So they took away a couple of $1,000 a year from the poorest of the poorest children in the United States for education. But even at UNH, the most expensive in-state school, in the United States, teachers after their 4-year degree, that's whether they've paid the full 120 at UNH or they get it subvented down in various ways, they're at least going to end up owing $60,000 or something.
Right.
And then they're going to work for 37 before taxes and expenses and bring in your own chalk.
Yeah. Student debt is crippling this country.
It's a joke.
We have educators in Manchester, we hear the stories all of the time, that aren't able to live on their own. And they're adults, and they're not in their 20s, they were in their 40s, that cannot live on their own because they can't afford it. Then they had 3 years of frozen pay scale.
Right.
They're frustrated. These are really frustrated people.
And it makes, and $37,000, I don't know, I'm very aware that there are people, like whatever minimum wages, there are people working for, $25,000 or something, whatever it may be. There are probably people working for some less, $400 a week, right? So if you're working for $10 an hour. But the truth of the matter is that if you were in any other profession, that the income would be a lot higher. So people go into teaching because they want to work with kids because they love it. They don't go into it because they're going to buy their first limousine out of it.
Right.
But I worry about. I've always said, when people are arguing about all the usual arguments about teachers and they don't work, and I don't want to be. These are just ridiculous things when people say them. They don't work. They finish at 2:30, which we know is not all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is that they get paid a small fraction or a fraction of what they would get paid if they had another 4-year degree doing something else. And in the end, all I care about, to be blunt, I've said to people in the past when I want to argue about these things, I don't care how the compensation package works, like what percentage is paid for healthcare and not paid for healthcare, and I just want the whole thing as a ball together to be good enough that we can attract quality people to work in a city of Manchester. Right. If that's $4 a week, then fine. If it's $400,000 a week, then we need $400,000 a week. We need, though, the bottom line is it's a competitive world. We want our kids being taught by wonderful, committed, talented teachers. And the way to do that is compensate them adequately. And just on my soapbox for one more minute, I've said to people who've talked about the challenges in Manchester and how people can go and they can teach and pick whatever well-heeled town you like. And I've made up. I come from a long line of teachers, even though I'm sadly not one myself. My sister just retired this past year. But I take the view that if that a newly minted teacher coming out of college, full of hope and fire and zest and enthusiasm for helping kids and working with kids, Manchester is a mecca. Why would you want to work in some, academy in the backwoods of New Hampshire, where everybody shows up on their SUV and their biggest problem is, what the orthodontist appointment at 4 p.m. You get to come into Manchester and do the job you dreamt when you were in college of doing, working with kids. And let's be honest too, right? This idea that Manchester is full of kids. That all we have is troubled kids, poor kids. That's not true either. We have the wonderful thing is we have the full spectrum. But we do need to make sure that we're offering compensation to teachers that ensures that we're not losing them. And I think it'll be wonderful to put some facts behind those numbers and that survey you're going to do and let the public know, because a lot of people are just uninformed.
Very true. We had a first-year teacher this past year who worked very, very hard at what she did. And she had her choice this summer of working in a different school here in Manchester or taking a job somewhere else. The job somewhere else that she was offered is a one-year position, but she chose to take that one-year position over a position in Manchester. Part of it certainly was because of the compensation that we have.
Right.
Other parts of it were, had to do with some of her experiences, but for the most part, it was really, I'm going to be paid more as a second-year teacher. I'm actually going to be paid as a second-year teacher as opposed to another year at first-year salary.
Right.
And her choice was to take a one-year position over something that, is in the district that would give her 2 years of seniority.
Right.
So you have to think about what some of those types of things say about us and about Manchester. And I think, Maxine and I have been working very hard with some of the new teachers. We'll have some new programs going within MEA for aspiring educators who are coming from the local colleges to student teach in our classrooms.
Right.
We'll be working with early educators and what are they doing during their first years, because Manchester unfortunately had to stop their mentoring program just basically because of money, but that's something that is vitally necessary.
What was the mentoring program?
So the mentoring programs depended on when you were going through them, but this is something actually that Maxine a number of years ago was one of the key creators of. And this was a program that was designed to work with incoming educators to talk about these are the things to expect during certain times of the year. These are, the people to go to in your building to ask questions, to talk about, how do I record grades in the computer system? How do I, what do I do during bus duty or during lunch duty or whatever? And so the, mentors who were somewhere in the buildings, we did have some district-wide mentors who would come and watch us and help us with just some coaching.
Right.
They would come watch lessons and coach us on how we were doing.
So these would be more experienced teachers who would work with incoming teachers, et cetera.
That's correct.
And these were folks who went through intensive training. We partnered with UNH and designed and developed coursework. They took a series of graduate coursework. They had to apply, go through an interview process, go through the coursework. Then 2 were selected, initially 3, and then they pared it down to 2. They went on to a release program where they were not in the classroom for 1 to 3 years, and they were out in the schools. They had new teachers that they were assigned to go out and observe them, co-teach with them, work on the culture of the school, but really work on their pedagogy, really work on their skill set. During those times, we had very few people leave the district. People who are still in the district who went through that talk about the value of it. That program then morphed into they paid a stipend to some people in buildings, but those people were working full-time and trying to mentor. So we've lost that support for our new young people coming into, as you say, a very intense situation in Manchester. Beyond, we look at the opioid crisis, and for years we talked about how that impacted adults. It's impacted children.
Oh, my God,
dramatically.
yes.
I mean, and at my school last year, and I'm a school counselor in a middle school, I, for the first time, really saw that increase of students not living with their biological parents. They're living in foster care. they're living in placements, they're living with grandparents and aunts and uncles who are wonderful enough to take them on, as well as their own children, because of the opioid crisis. So the impact on children and what they're dealing with trauma, and then, we need to educate them, but we need to get through that trauma with them first.
And we also have a challenge, right, that has been well telegraphed, and there should be no surprise about it. I don't know, it's not my area of expertise, like most other areas, but we've known now that the opioid crisis has been with us, I don't know, maybe 5 years at the level that it's at now, or as a very significant thing, maybe longer. But I used to have the numbers to hand, and I don't remember now, but a significant number of babies were being born at Elliott and CMC every week to opiate-addicted mothers. And so some of the good news is it turns out that medically the kids are compromised, the babies are compromised, but it turns out that not as catastrophic as people were taught at first.
Right.
So that, we'd have to have a medical professional and child development professional to talk about it. But it actually, originally was thought that these opiate-dependent babies and affected babies would be anyway. Let's not go down that road too far. Other than to say that they are affected, though. So the issue you're talking about kids living in families where mom's addicted or dad is or whatever it might be. Now we have the children hitting in kindergarten who actually are the. And this is like having, this is and no special funding, no special care, no special case has been made. Governor Sununu is announcing today or tomorrow what's going to happen with the additional federal funding that we borrowed the money for to give out to people. Just a little dig. But I worry about the effect on the public school system of having these kids coming through. Right? I mean, we must be seeing the beginning of them right now.
You're seeing the beginnings in our preschool programs, our kindergarten, and our first grade. That's where we're seeing the significant impact at this point. And we need better professional development, more ongoing embedded professional development. We need more staff. We're having significant difficulty getting people to become paraeducators.
Right.
So folks, if you're out there and you're looking for work and you love to work with kids, look at a paraeducator job, because these are kids who need you.
Right.
We need hands on deck. We need people who are going to support the educators so they can teach.
Yeah.
But we're talking about kids who have lifelong issues, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe. They need to be cared for in a different way in our schools than we've ever had to care for a growing population of child.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's extraordinary that in the city, like there's what frustrates me about it is that there's no reason that we need to be as constrained as we are. We've just decided to do it to ourselves. So because we spend less on education than everybody else, I keep saying it because it's just frustrating as all heck. We drew a line in the sand and said this is when we were at a low ebb, and so. It's not as though throwing money at the problem alone is going to resolve it.
Right.
But when you're spending less than everybody, and everybody, only an idiot would sort of an alien landing on Earth or in New Hampshire would believe that when you look at it, you'd imagine that the city of Manchester or cities like Manchester would be spending more because they have a more expensive student population than a more well-to-do town. And of course, we turn that upside down on its head and spend, ridiculously high amounts of money. I mean, some school districts in New Hampshire are spending, and they may be very cherry picking the very richest of them, but they're spending it's hard for an Irish guy, $32,000 per student per year,
Right.
and we're spending 12. And we go to a lot of towns that are at 15, 17, 18, 14, all around the place. So. There really isn't an excuse, so it's very frustrating to go into classrooms and see a teacher sitting in front of 30 kids or standing in front of 30 kids and doing that all day all day in and day out. So let's go back to just jumping for a minute because we're halfway through here. Last night's board meeting, there were a number of things. You might have, I don't know everything that came up. The driver's ed issue came up, I know. And then also the issue with the YOU, the Youth Leadership Group, who this attempt to have students be represented on the school board. I heard that was voted down. But how did that go?
That, the student representation was not specifically about the YOU program. This was,
Okay, yes,
this,
for true.
this was very much about the school board, and particularly certain members of the school board who really just do not want to have student voice on
Right.
the school board. You know, we thought as it was going along, they're presenting many arguments about or ways that, you know, we just shouldn't have kids on the board. We can't have them because of work rules. We can't have them because of this and because of that. There's always ways to work around those things. And so their decision basically last night was to go back to committee. The student who was there, who had been to the committee meeting and so on, did get up and speak.
And who was that? Do you know who that was? Was it?
I don't
one of
know.
the
She's from Memorial.
Memorial High School.
Okay.
So, but a lovely young lady, and I'm sorry that I don't.
Was she
recall
one of the
her name.
YOU girls?
No.
No. Okay.
No, she.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Sue.
Yeah.
They did. I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't mean to be rude, but the controversy about the YOU girls being left out of the original ad hoc committee to
Right.
talk about this, that was resolved, right? As I understand it, was it, or was it?
It was quite a while ago
Yeah.
that it was determined. Basically, this ad hoc committee is supposed to be the committee that is designing what will happen
Right.
with student representation. So they have students from all of our high schools
Right.
there to be a part of this design process.
Right.
And that's what's going on right now. So
And-
right now, it's not that the young lady who was there last night is necessarily going to be one of the people who
Right.
is a representative of her school, but they talked about where are they going to get these representatives, and how is this going to work, and the whole point that was made in particular by Committeeman Want was that the board members were there to kind of be the guide and say, yes, we're going to have some student voice on the board. No, they're not going to be voting members. And, you know, let's do this and see where we can go. And then the rest of it is really supposed to be put together by the students.
Right.
And so the students had to figure out, how are we going to do this? Is it going to come from student council members? Is it going to come from how are we going to do elections in the schools? How are we going to disseminate the information back to the schools? And they did a lot of talking about that. So at this point, everything is just sent back to committee because
It's all
people
very
weren't happy with it.
it's all very you know, problematic.
Yes.
Because I was so disappointed. One of the, and like there are times, and you know, we know that people, I say it all the time, people go on the school board and board of mayor and alderman, they give of their time. You know, it's except for the people who take the free healthcare, which I don't agree with. It's an unpaid position, or largely unpaid. So you know, they deserve credit for giving of their time. But I sometimes get very disappointed by the board as a whole. And the meeting around that topic of choosing, when the argument was about choosing the students to represent, that was a low in my mind, because it was so, the intolerance and the just the nastiness of the way the whole thing was just, and it's people talking past each other. You know, because I wasn't, if I'd been on that board, I wouldn't have been questioning the vice chairman and his choice. I mean, like accusing him of actively doing something. But I would have said, like, passively, this has happened. The result doesn't matter. What your intention is doesn't matter. The result, because you know, I know what happens in any school, right? Principals are busy. Our administrators are busy. Everybody's busy. Everybody's overtasked. Everybody's got too much to do. This call comes in from left field. Send me a student who's going. Well, you know who gets chosen? It's the same 5 or 6 kids. And God bless them. It's a reason, because they're more motivated. They're organized. They're academically achieving. But they also, you know, they're self-described. And so you end up, when you say to the principals across, you know, 4 high schools, like, send me the same 10 names are going to show up, and this is a problem that you'll see some administrators try to resolve. You know that they know we know in any given class, and I'm a big academics guy. Like I think it's wonderful, and I still, I was. Education was beaten into me by the Christian and Presentation Brothers back in Ireland. It wasn't a subtle thing. And there was only one measure. It wasn't about how well intentioned you were and how hard you tried. It was just so. And I still suffer from some of that. So I like, people who achieve academically and all that stuff, and I find it admirable. But I also recognise that when I go into first grade, this is a terrible condemnation. That with even all our efforts, when I go into first grade, I can pick out the group that's going to be standing on the stage at Memorial Central and West, getting in the National Honor Society at the end of 13 years. And I know we all try hard to undo that, and there are exceptions. But, so the idea of sort of, this is a difficult topic. It's hard to talk about because people say, well, why are you overlooking those kids and artificially choosing others or something? And I just wish all the rhetoric would just die down a little and people work for the common good of the district.
I think this committee in particular for Student Voice has worked pretty hard on that. They, from what I understand, and part of the issue last night was it was in the SAU boardroom, so people who were not facing me were a little difficult to hear sometimes. Right. But they really tried to work on that and think about how are we going to open this opportunity to students, not limiting it to students who may need a GPA of 3.0 or higher.
Right.
Right. If that maintenance is not part of the requirements, you're opening it to more students. And how are they going to open it to students? And I think they have been well guided by the people on the board who are a part of this, and Principal Adamakis. Because they really stopped to think, if we want to have true student voice, who's that student in each school who is going to bring that? And then, of course, you've got 4 schools. So the other piece of it for them was, how are we going to get our students to these meetings? Because we're not putting 4 of them in the meeting. It's 1 student. So they thought about rotations, like, Central for 3 months, MST for 3 months, West, like that.
But I'm glad Adamakis is in the middle of it, Mr. Adamakis, because he's a level-headed sort of, person who and knows what he's talking about. He's been around a while. So at least,
Absolutely.
But the thing that bothers me often, and again, with all the caveats about people, I don't want to malign anybody, and not that everybody's a good actor, but most are. It is frustrating sometimes. I don't know if you would agree with this, but I find it frustrating listening to a board meeting sometimes, and people are saying things that are just incorrect. Like they have no idea what's actually happening in the school, and they're board members, and they're pontificating, and they've gone on for they're like Jim O'Connell. They talk a lot. They've gone on for 10 minutes on a premise that's totally wrong, and you're sitting and like I sit in the chamber sometimes, and I sometimes murmur a little bit because like I'm hoping somebody will like would someone just tell them that the whole 10 minutes is wasted. This is not so. You would hope that having a student voice there would help that they'd be asked.
Let me share with you a story that debunks a myth that this is something new, trying to get a student voice on. We actually were talking to Corey Doherty today, who's one of our veteran art teachers at Central and daughter of State Representative Mary Heath. Big education family. When Corey was in high school at Memorial, she was the Memorial representative, student voice, to the school board.
Really?
And each of the 3 high schools had a student voice, and they regularly went to board meetings and were able to converse with board members about issues from the student's perspective. So this is not new.
Right.
What's new is the perception of many people that people on the board do not want to hear student voice. And I think that in itself needs to be checked.
Right.
Because perception is everything. And I think that this is their education, and nobody knows better how we can improve things than kids working with us.
Right.
So I think it's a little bit debunking falsehoods. I think for us and for you is a very important strategy to help people in the community understand that this is not a new thing that a group of kids made up.
Right.
This is something that a group of kids came forward with because they really have dealt with discriminatory practices and they have dealt with institutional racism, and it is a real thing.
Right.
And kids of color do sometimes get behind the eight ball. People get upset sometimes when kids especially speak with angst and passion, because then they think they're being rude and disrespectful. They're speaking with angst because they've lived a tough life. They want to be heard. And in my opinion, as an educator and a human being, there's no better thing that we can do with our kids to give them opportunities to share their voices and share their stories.
Let them be heard. Yeah, and we've got we've had some examples in this past year in Manchester of student voices not being heard and being frustrated, and I found I just found that troubling, that we're trying to keep the lid on things, etc. And people don't want to have. People would prefer to get angry and cross about pick out some word. You mentioned institutional racism or something, and they want to get all up, and then that's it. They're going to throw their, as we say back in Ireland, throw the rattler out of the pram and start screaming, right? But rather than face the reality. And the reality is, that when Deb Livingston was here, Superintendent Deb Livingston, and she was, and I told her to her face at the time, she was politically, at the most lenient thing I could say, was politically naive when she put a PowerPoint presentation before the school board in preparation for the budget, and it was a $160 million budget or something, and there were like 4 items in the budget, and there was like $163 million or something to run the schools. But anyway, she identified, and I'm shorthanding this a little bit, but she identified a couple of lines, but there might have been 10 or something. There were very few bullet lines. Well, one of them was $5,000 to seek a more diverse candidate pool for teachers by reaching out to Massachusetts, etc. And the other one was a dean of students at MST. And the political naivety of it is, there were so many things to talk about in the $160 million budget. We had kids not having seats to sit on. We had bursting classes. We had so many issues. We had, sewerage leaking into a classroom in one of our grade schools. That was all going on under the $160 million. And we spent a board meeting with people getting mad because we were going to spend $5,000 to reach out to Massachusetts to advertise the fact that jobs were available in Manchester and perhaps people might want to come here. And what people were really angry about was they started talking about quotas and why are we trying to... And the bottom line is, you walk into our schools, we love all our teachers and all our administrators and all the rest of it, but, you go into our schools and the profile of the staff doesn't match the profile of the students. Right. And then what's wrong with attempting to fix that a little bit?
Yeah. I would hope that going forward, the voters in Manchester really think about what kind of persons they want in the seats of the school board. Those folks are elected to support and encourage public education. Public education.
Right.
That's their charge. And it's not about their particular personal children or their particular lives. They have 14,000 children right now that they are responsible for. We don't have curriculums in the elementary school for math. I mean, there are people that need to stand up and say, this is what I want for my children. This is what I want for my child. These are the people that I want fighting for my children and my child. And I think that there's too much, respectfully, pontification on the school board about who has to be right. That they've lost listening to each other. I mean, Sue and I happen to be talking about, it was great that they had a retreat to learn how to communicate with each other. I think they need to go back to the retreat.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes you need to, just like with kids, you need to keep training in something until it works. It's embarrassing for me because I work a lot on the state level. I work a lot with NEA New Hampshire. I'm on the executive board. To have people ask me about the politics in Manchester, because those folks who live in this area watch the board meetings online. They watch them, and I find it personally embarrassing as a professional woman living in a city who has great affection for what I do and for my students to always have to explain about the political negativity that we have.
Well, so, Maxine, this is easy stuff, right? It's not that complicated. we have school board members in Manchester school board member at large, Rich Gerard, 3 months ago or 4 months ago at a school board meeting, and those minutes are available online. You can go look at them. And he sits next to Ross Terrio, who's been on the show a number of times, and Ross is also a Republican and conservative member of the board. But the disagreement between them and between the board members had to do with who they report, who they're responsible for. And Rich Gerard made it very plain that he did not feel a fiduciary obligation towards the public school children of Manchester. He actually went further than that, and he said that when he looked at things on the school board, he looked at it from the point of view of the taxpayers. He looked at it writ large, in other words, old, young, middle, and everybody else. And I think that's fine. I think any responsible person would want to do the right thing by the taxpayers. But the fact that he refused responsibility for the actual public, he said he represented private schools, I don't know the words he's mounting, he said religious, but all schools, private schools, charter schools, public charter schools, homeschoolers, no schoolers, everything. And so there's one of your 14 people sitting on the board who want is best for, Beach Street School or McLaughlin or pick the next school down the street. That's only one of his concerns. He's concerned about the taxpayers writ large. And when we have public representatives in Manchester, up in Concord, voting against the interest of Manchester schools, we have Victoria Sullivan, who is the number 2 person now in the state and on the Republican side, and sits on the Education Committee. And I was, Victoria and I have talked a number of times, and we disagree, because we're come at things differently, and I respect that. But today she's on social media, or yesterday, saying that in Manchester that all stipends should be eliminated. For after-school programs and athletics, that they should all be eliminated, and that money should be used to put a police officer in every school, because what we need is to keep our kids safe first. Now, people have argued back that would imply eliminating after-school programs. It would imply, for art and music and sports and recreate all this stuff. But that's her belief, and she sits on the Education Committee in Concord. So when she gets a chance, that's So I agree with you 1,000%, Maxine. People should be paying attention to who they vote for, because it does make a difference. And if someone can't look at you in the face and say, "I'm here to make sure that our schools, led by starting with our 4 now high schools, MST, West, Central, and Memorial, I want to make them the best high schools in the state, and our 4 middle schools," if they can't say that, then I think people shouldn't be voting for them. We've got in a few minutes. What about the driver's aid thing? So we've abandoned driver's aid.
Actually, we have. Yeah, they had a short discussion about that last night, fully understanding that the contract that they had before was someone that went very sour.
Yeah.
They really didn't want to relive that with somebody else. If we offered it in the schools, it would mean taking teachers out of classrooms to go teach driver's ed. You're talking
Can I
about
just interrupt you a
liability
minute?
in insurance and cars and all that kind of stuff. And Dr. Avard's point to it all was that, the demand for driver's education has gone up in Manchester because of the fact that the Manchester schools are not supplying it anymore. So because the demand has gone up over the past few years and will continue, the supply is now coming up so that private businesses are offering driver's education, and they chose to they voted on not pursuing driver's education any longer.
Well, I find that a strange argument. I have 4 kids who have gone through driver's ed. The second last one did her driver's ed in Amherst because there was no availability for the year in Manchester. At Central High School this past year, there was one period of a few weeks where there was availability, and that was it. And there was no other availability. So I drove in and out of Amherst in the snow and rain to go to things. I don't understand. It seems to me that I would have thought it as the perfect complementary job for teachers, because no students are doing driver's aid during school hours. So if presuming teachers wanted to do it, and if they wanted to do it, you finish school at 2:30 or 3, whatever it is in high school, and then people do driver's aid in the afternoon if people wanted to do it. it was previously, it was only privatized in the last few years. So we privatized it and we didn't do a good job, and we could talk for hours about how that all went down with the one vendor who came into City Hall and said to Mayor Gatzis at halfway through his contract that, well, you know, you and I, Your Honor, when we met in your office and you promised me this, and Mayor Gatzis was all, well, but I never promised you anything. And the guy said, well, you told me this in your office, and the fact is, what was on paper was on paper. What was said in office was different, and whatever. But I was hoping that it would be a program. I don't care in the end once it's a good once there's availability for kids to do it. As we come down to the last 5 minutes or so, for folks here in Manchester, what would you like to tell them about the MEA and what's going on, how you hope the year will go, etc.?
Well, I think we're really looking forward to coming back to school, having a great school year. You know, I think for us in particular, one of our main focuses is to get the contract finished.
Right.
We would really like to think more outside the box
Okay.
than we are on some things. You know, we have to negotiate about money things like salary and benefits and so
Right.
on. But you know, there's many other things that we've brought up, and that the board has brought up to think about things like safety and those types of things. That if
Right.
you know, if those things are contractual, may be very beneficial for both sides.
Right.
So you know,
where
we're
do you
looking
come
forward to
down?
that.
If we're straying into sort of contract areas,
Mm-hmm.
I'll understand if you can't talk about it. But you know, I know that Dr. Vargas is troubled by the school year duration, the
Mm-hmm.
hours thing, as opposed to the days.
Mm-hmm.
Is that too close? I mean, is that where do you think teachers are on that subject, or are they divided? Or
I think that the majority of teachers, at least the ones who've answered surveys multiple times for us about these types of things, are very much in favor of the hours contract, or hours calendar, which is what we
Right.
currently have.
Right.
This is basically following the prescribed number of hours by the Department of Education. We, for the most part, except probably for last year with all the snow days we had, we spend many extra hours in the classroom with our students because we have that all built in.
Right.
So I think most of our people are very happy with the
Right.
hours calendar. The days calendar would add in a good 5, 6 more days of school.
Right.
The hard part, I think, about the days calendar is that it's not nearly as predictable as the hours
right.
calendar.
And that
for
was
when
the
we get
argument
out.
made, I think, when John Avard was leading the negotiation process on this. And one of the things, when I was that 3 years ago or something now, it was like this whole idea that we'd know when graduation was, and
Right.
we'd know when school was
Right.
starting and all the rest of it. Well, we're down to the last 30 seconds. It was a pleasure to have you in. You know,
you.
we kind of did the scattergraphic thing tonight where we went over a lot of different stuff. You know, we could probably spend hours more talking on the things. And as we get into this, I'd love to have you guys back. And anytime, you're always
Great.
welcome. The door's always
Thank
open,
you.
as you know. Because I think it's important to people here. Because the voices on the, if there's another side, so other voices are heard very loudly, and I think teachers need to have their voices heard, and you're the first people to do that. So I'm very appreciative of being here. Thank you, folks, for listening to us tonight. Thank you, Maxine, and thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Enjoy the last week or two of summer, and we look forward to seeing everybody standing at the top of the driveway on the 5th of September as we drop off our bundles of joy to be looked after by our teachers. Thank you, folks. Have a wonderful week. Stay safe, and we'll see you in a week's time. All the best from Education Matters. Goodbye now.